It began like any other morning. The lake's gentle waves danced under the early sun, a quiet reminder of nature's calm. But that peace was broken by a chilling discovery. Two lives, a mother and her young daughter, tragically ended. Stephanie Morrow and her little girl were found by the water's edge, their story leaving an entire community stunned and searching for answers. What could have led to this heartbreaking scene? And who was responsible for turning their world into a nightmare? This is their story, one of love, betrayal, and a search for justice. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind the tragedy. If you're ready for gripping tales like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's begin. Stephanie Morrow was a woman many admired. At just 29, she had built a life full of warmth and success. She was known as a talented baker whose creations brought joy to anyone who tasted them. But beyond her thriving business was something even sweeter, her life at home. She shared a loving bond with her husband Morrow, a hard-working mechanic whose dedication to his family was evident in every smile he gave her. Together, they had created a home filled with laughter, love, and shared dreams. Stephanie and Morrow's connection was rare. They were partners in every sense of the word, their relationship growing from high school sweethearts to a marriage marked by shared milestones and unwavering support. Their moments together painted a picture of joy, late nights exchanging stories, mornings filled with the scent of fresh-baked pastries, and quiet evenings with their young daughter, whose giggles echoed through their home. The family's life seemed like something out of a storybook. But no story is without its shadows. Jane, Stephanie's closest friend, had been part of her life for years. They shared secrets, laughter, and countless memories. Jane often joined the Morrows for celebrations, her presence a fixture at birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet afternoons at the family table. She and Stephanie seemed inseparable, their friendship a thread woven deeply into their lives. Yet, there was something else, a quiet tension, unnoticed by most. As Stephanie's life flourished, Jane's smiles began to fade at the edges. While she shared in her friend's joy, there were fleeting moments when her gaze lingered too long or her laughter sounded hollow. To outsiders, it was nothing. To Jane, it was everything. She longed for a life like Stephanie's, a thriving career, a devoted husband, and a family's embrace. But longing can turn into something far more dangerous. Still, on the surface, everything appeared normal. Home videos captured moments of bliss. Stephanie and Morrow cutting a cake while their daughter clapped excitedly, the family playing together on a sunny afternoon, Jane standing just off to the side, smiling as she held a camera. These were moments of happiness, moments the Morrows believed would last forever. But those closest to us can hold the deepest secrets. And sometimes, love and loyalty can mask something much darker. As Jane lingered in the backdrop of the Morrows' life, no one could have imagined the events that would soon unfold, a tragedy that would shatter the bond between friends and leave a family broken. Stephanie's life had always been a balancing act, but lately, the scales seemed to tip more often. Her success as a baker led to an expansion, another branch of her business in San Antonio. While this was a milestone worth celebrating, it brought new challenges. The long hours, frequent trips, and countless decisions began to weigh on her. What once felt manageable now pulled her in many directions, leaving little time for the small joys she cherished at home. Morrow noticed the changes. Though he supported Stephanie's ambitions, her absences were felt deeply. The laughter that once filled their evenings grew quieter, replaced by hurried calls and missed dinners. He reassured her, often with a warm smile or a gentle word, but the distance, both physical and emotional, was undeniable. It wasn't just Morrow who saw the strain. Jane, ever present and watchful, took note as well. Jane had been Stephanie's confidant for years, but her role seemed to shift as Stephanie's life grew busier. What started as a helpful hand quickly turned into something else. Jane began to insert herself more deeply into the Morrows' daily lives. She offered to watch their daughter, stopped by unannounced with baked goods, and lingered during casual visits. To Stephanie, these were the actions of a caring friend. To Morrow, they were, at times, a little too much. As Stephanie shared the joys and challenges of her expanding business, Jane listened intently. But her support masked something else. Her admiration for Stephanie's success began to twist, sharpened by envy. She saw the affection in Morrow's eyes when he spoke of his wife, the tender moments between them that seemed effortless. It wasn't just Stephanie's career that Jane envied, it was the life she had built, the love she had cultivated, the family she had nurtured. Small actions hinted at this growing discontent. Jane's questions about Stephanie's trips to San Antonio became more probing, as if searching for cracks in the picture-perfect life she saw. She intercepted a message meant for Morrow, laughing it off as a mistake when questioned. Her gaze lingered when Morrow spoke, her compliments carrying an edge that felt out of place. Stephanie, preoccupied with her work and family, didn't notice these subtle shifts. But there were moments when things didn't quite add up. An unexplained phone call that ended abruptly when she entered the room. A cryptic comment from Jane about how hard it must be to juggle everything. These were small, fleeting moments, easily dismissed in the rush of daily life. But they pointed to something deeper, a growing tension that neither Stephanie nor Morrow fully understood. As Jane's presence grew, so did her influence. She framed herself as the supportive friend, always available, always willing to help. But her actions hinted at something more calculated. When Stephanie mentioned her plans for the next trip, Jane's smile didn't reach her eyes. When Morrow shared a story about his wife, Jane's laughter seemed hollow. The signs were there, though subtle. A misplaced comment, a lingering glance, an unasked-for favor. Stephanie's world continued to turn, but the shadows around her began to lengthen. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that her closest friend was no longer just a bystander in her life. Jane had stepped closer, and with each passing day, the cracks in their friendship grew a little wider. What once was a bond built on trust had begun to shift, setting the stage for events that no one could have foreseen. And as the days unfolded, those subtle actions and fleeting moments would soon reveal their true weight. The sun rose quietly over the lake that morning, casting a golden glow across its surface. The water was still, broken only by the gentle ripples of a passing breeze. Birds sang their songs from the treetops, unaware of the scene that would soon bring an eerie silence to this peaceful place. For all its beauty, the lake would become the setting for a discovery that no one could have imagined. It was a jogger who first noticed something unusual. From a distance, it looked like a bundle of clothing near the shore. But as they moved closer, the shape became unmistakable. Lying motionless by the water were the bodies of a young mother and her child. The jogger's shout for help echoed through the stillness, carrying a sense of urgency that would soon draw the attention of the entire community. The police arrived quickly, cordoning off the area and working to piece together what had happened. Officers in uniform moved carefully along the shore, marking evidence and documenting every detail. Cameras clicked, capturing the heartbreaking scene, while investigators examined footprints, tire marks, and anything that might provide answers. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, a sharp contrast against the serene backdrop of the lake. For those who knew Stephanie Morrow and her daughter, the news spread like wildfire. Morrow, who had been at home that morning, received the call that would change his life forever. His voice, steady at first, broke into silence as the weight of the words sank in. Within hours, he arrived at the scene, his face pale, his movements slow and heavy. Friends and neighbors tried to comfort him, but what solace could be found in such a moment? The love of his life and their child were gone. The initial theory was simple, almost too simple. Could this have been an accident? The lake, though calm, was deep in places. It wasn't unheard of for an unsuspecting swimmer or playful child to fall victim to its hidden dangers. But the presence of both bodies raised questions. Stephanie was a strong swimmer, known to have spent summers by the water. How could she and her daughter both have been lost in such a way? And then there was the positioning, details that suggested this wasn't an accident at all. As investigators delved deeper, they found signs that didn't add up. Stephanie's purse, neatly placed several feet from the shore, was dry despite the water's reach. Her phone, missing entirely, was another clue. And then there were the faint marks on the ground, a scuffle, perhaps, or something more deliberate. Each detail added to the puzzle, leaving detectives with more questions than answers. Morrow's grief was compounded by the uncertainty. He clung to memories of his wife and daughter, their laughter, their love, their shared moments. How could such a bright life be extinguished so suddenly? As he stood by the lake, his eyes fixed on the water, the same thought echoed in his mind. This couldn't have been an accident. For the community, The tragedy was a shock. Stephanie, known for her kindness and generosity, had touched the lives of so many. Her daughter, full of innocence and potential, was a light taken far too soon. The lake, once a place of calm, now carried a weight it had never known. People gathered near the shore, leaving flowers and candles, their faces etched with sorrow and disbelief. But even in the midst of mourning, whispers began to spread. Theories emerged, each one more troubling than the last. Was this a random act of violence? A robbery gone wrong? Or could someone close to Stephanie have played a part? The questions loomed large, and as investigators pressed forward, the answers seemed both distant and urgent. What happened by the lakeside that morning was more than a tragedy. It was the beginning of a search for truth. And while the evidence pointed in many directions, one thing was certain. The peaceful surface of the lake had hidden something far darker, and uncovering it would test the strength of everyone involved. The investigation into the lakeside tragedy began as the morning light stretched across the crime scene. Officers worked methodically, collecting evidence that might offer insight into how Stephanie and her daughter met their end. Every detail was scrutinized: the position of their bodies, the items left behind, and the faint markings in the soft earth. It was clear this was no ordinary case, and every piece of evidence had a story to tell. Forensic experts arrived soon after. They set to work, examining fibers on Stephanie's clothing, analyzing the soil for signs of disturbance, and documenting the footprints leading to and from the lakeside. A faint trail of scuffed earth hinted at a struggle, a brief but violent moment that left its mark on the ground. Nearby, fragments of torn fabric clung to a bush, whispering of a desperate attempt to resist. Witness accounts began to trickle in. A local fisherman reported seeing a car parked near the lake late the previous evening, though he couldn't describe it in detail. Another resident mentioned hearing raised voices in the distance, but the words were muffled by the wind. These fragments of testimony were pieces of a larger puzzle, each one adding to the growing picture of that fateful night. As the investigation gained momentum, the police identified a potential suspect, a local drifter who had been seen in the area. He was known to camp near the lake and had a reputation for odd behavior. When questioned, his story was inconsistent. He claimed to have seen nothing unusual, but his nervous demeanor and vague timeline raised eyebrows. Searches of his belongings turned up no direct evidence, but the mere hint of his involvement sent ripples through the community. Could he have been there that night? Was he responsible for what happened to Stephanie and her daughter? The focus on the drifter, however, was only part of the story. As the days passed, attention turned closer to home. Jane, Stephanie's closest friend, had been one of the last people to see her alive. Her initial statement seemed straightforward. She had spent the evening with Stephanie before parting ways. Yet, as detectives revisited her account, small cracks began to appear. Jane's alibi, solid at first glance, started to shift under scrutiny. Surveillance footage contradicted her timeline, showing her car in a different location than she had claimed. When asked about this, her response was hesitant, her words carefully chosen. She blamed the discrepancy on a forgotten errand, but her explanation felt rehearsed, as if she had prepared for this moment. Footage from the investigation room captured Jane's unease. She fidgeted with her hands, her eyes darting toward the door when questions grew more pointed. Her tone remained calm, but her body betrayed her. Each pause, each careful word added to the growing doubt surrounding her story. The detectives noticed, and their questions grew sharper. As they pieced together Jane's movements that night, more inconsistencies came to light. Phone records revealed a call made to Stephanie shortly before her death, a call Jane hadn't mentioned in her statement. Witnesses recalled seeing Jane at a gas station near the lake, her demeanor tense and hurried. These small details began to weave a troubling narrative, one that painted Jane not as the grieving friend she appeared to be but as someone hiding something. Still, the case was far from clear. The drifter remained a suspect, his odd behavior and vague answers keeping him in the spotlight. But as the investigation progressed, the evidence began to lean in another direction. Jane's nervous reactions, the contradictions in her alibi, and her proximity to Stephanie in the days leading up to the tragedy all pointed to a deeper connection. The detectives knew they were at a crossroads. The evidence against Jane was compelling but circumstantial. To prove her involvement, or clear her name entirely, they would need more. The search for definitive answers continued, the weight of the case pressing down on everyone involved. And as the days stretched into weeks, one question lingered above all. Who had the motive to end the lives of a mother and her child, and why? For now, the pieces of the puzzle remained scattered, but the picture was starting to take shape. The truth, though still elusive, felt closer with every passing day. Jane had always been there, Stephanie's confidant, her trusted friend, the one person she turned to when life grew too overwhelming. Their bond seemed unshakable, forged over years of shared memories and unwavering support. But behind the shared laughter and warm embraces, something far darker had taken root. Jane's admiration for Stephanie had started innocently enough. She marveled at her friend's success as a baker, her ability to juggle a thriving career with a loving marriage and a beautiful child. But admiration slowly turned into envy, and envy grew into something more consuming. Jane didn't just want a life like Stephanie's. She wanted Stephanie's life. It was in the small moments that her obsession began to surface. A lingering glance at Morrow during family gatherings. A seemingly innocent compliment that carried a heavier meaning. "You're so lucky to have him," she'd say, her tone light but her gaze lingering a second too long. And then there were the subtle advances, offering to help Morrow with tasks Stephanie was too busy for, standing a little too close during conversations, laughing just a bit too loudly at his jokes. Morrow, ever devoted to his wife, brushed off these moments as nothing more than friendliness. Stephanie, preoccupied with work and family, didn't notice the shifts in Jane's behavior. But Jane noticed everything. Every smile between the couple, every tender gesture, every shared secret. It gnawed at her, the sense that she was always on the outside looking in. Her frustration grew as she watched Stephanie's life flourish. The new bakery branch in San Antonio was a testament to her success, a shining example of everything Jane felt she would never achieve. With each passing day, the weight of her own insecurities became harder to bear. And then, she made a decision. If she couldn't have what Stephanie had, she would take it by force. Jane's plan unfolded over weeks, carefully disguised as acts of friendship. She offered to help Stephanie with her demanding schedule, suggesting a trip to the lake for a day of relaxation. "You deserve a break," she said, her voice warm, her intentions anything but. Stephanie, trusting her friend as always, agreed without hesitation. The idea of spending a quiet day with her daughter and her closest companion felt like a welcome reprieve from the chaos of her life. But Jane's kindness masked a darker purpose. She chose the lake for its seclusion, knowing there would be no one to witness what was to come. She picked the timing carefully, ensuring Stephanie's guard would be down. And when the day arrived, everything was in place. Flashbacks reveal the moments leading up to that fateful trip. Jane packing a bag with items she would later discard to cover her tracks. Her rehearsed expressions in the mirror, practicing the perfect look of concern. The calm, calculated way she led Stephanie and her daughter to the water's edge, her voice steady, her heart racing. When they arrived at the lake, the atmosphere was serene. Stephanie's daughter played near the shore, her laughter echoing through the trees. Stephanie herself looked more relaxed than she had in weeks, grateful for the chance to unwind. Jane watched them, her smile masking the turmoil beneath. She waited for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to strike. The betrayal, when it came, was swift and brutal. Jane's voice turned cold, her words cutting through the calm like a blade. Stephanie, caught off guard, tried to reason with her friend, to understand what had brought them to this point. But Jane's mind was made up. The life she envied, the love she craved, it was all just out of reach, and she blamed Stephanie for every piece of it. The scene that followed was chaotic, a blur of desperation and fear. By the time it was over, the lake had claimed 2 lives, and Jane was alone on the shore. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what had just happened. And then, she began the work of covering her tracks, her movements methodical, her expression blank. Later, when the news broke, Jane played her role perfectly. She was the grieving friend, the supportive shoulder, the one who knew Stephanie best. But behind the tears and the carefully crafted stories, the truth was far more chilling. Jane had wanted everything Stephanie had, and in the end, she was willing to destroy her friend to get it. The investigation reached a turning point when the evidence against Jane became impossible to ignore. The inconsistencies in her alibi, the phone records, the surveillance footage, all of it painted a picture she could no longer explain away. The quiet whispers among the detectives grew louder until they became a single, undeniable conclusion. Jane was brought in for questioning, her confident demeanor cracking under the weight of the facts laid before her. Her arrest came quietly, with officers arriving at her door in the early morning hours. Jane, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, opened the door to find a detective standing there, warrant in hand. For a moment, she froze, her eyes darting between the officer and the badge. Then, without a word, she stepped aside, allowing them to enter. As the handcuffs clicked into place, her gaze remained steady, but there was something in her eyes, a mix of defiance and fear. The trial that followed captured the attention of the entire community. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with a mix of curiosity and tension. On one side sat Morrow, his face lined with grief, his hands clasped tightly together. On the other sat Jane, flanked by her legal team, her expression unreadable. The contrast between them was stark, one a man shattered by loss, the other a woman whose secrets had finally come to light. The prosecutor's opening argument was clear and concise. He painted a vivid picture of Jane's motives, her jealousy, her calculated actions. He described how she had lured Stephanie and her daughter to the lake, how she had orchestrated the events that led to their deaths. His words were sharp and deliberate, each one landing like a blow. "This was no accident," he said, his voice firm. "This was a premeditated act, carried out by someone who allowed envy to eclipse her humanity." Jane's defense team worked tirelessly to shift the narrative. They argued that there was no definitive proof linking her to the crime, that the evidence was circumstantial at best. They portrayed her as a victim of assumptions, a woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "She is not the monster they claim she is," her lawyer insisted, his voice rising with conviction. "She has suffered too. She has lost a friend." But it was Jane herself who became the trial's focal point. Called to the stand, she spoke with a voice that wavered between strength and vulnerability. She described her friendship with Stephanie, how they had grown close over the years, how she had looked up to her. She denied any involvement in the crime, her tone imploring the jury to see her as a person, not a suspect. "I loved Stephanie like a sister," she said, her eyes glistening. "I would never hurt her." Yet, her words didn't align with the evidence. The prosecutor cross-examined her with precision, challenging every statement that didn't match the facts. He brought up the surveillance footage, the phone call, the torn fabric found near the lake. Each question was a step closer to the truth, each answer a further unraveling of Jane's story. Inside Jane's mind, the pressure mounted. Flashes of guilt, anger, and self-justification swirled as she grappled with the reality of her actions. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she thought, her inner voice trembling. "If only things had been different. If only I had what she had." Her mind replayed the moments leading up to the crime, the choices she had made, the point of no return she had crossed. The trial's climax came with the closing arguments. The prosecutor, standing tall, addressed the jury one last time. "Jane's actions were not those of a friend," he said, his voice unwavering. "They were the actions of someone consumed by jealousy, willing to destroy the life of someone she claimed to care for. Stephanie and her daughter deserve justice. And you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have the power to deliver it." After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The room fell silent as the foreman stood, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "We find the defendant, Jane Dawson, guilty on all charges." The sentence that followed was swift and firm, a life behind bars. As Jane was led away, her face betrayed no emotion, but her hands trembled slightly, her fingers gripping the edges of her cuffs. Morrow, seated in the gallery, exhaled deeply, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over him. Justice had been served, but the void left by Stephanie and their daughter remained. The trial was over, but its impact lingered. For the community, it was a stark reminder of how envy could twist even the closest of bonds. For Morrow, it was a step toward healing, though the journey ahead would be long. And for Jane, it was a reckoning, a life once filled with promise, now confined to the consequences of her choices. The verdict marked the end of the trial, but for those left behind, the true struggle was only beginning. Morrow, once part of a family defined by love and laughter, now faced an empty home and a quiet that felt overwhelming. Every corner of the house held memories of Stephanie and their daughter. The kitchen where Stephanie had perfected her recipes, the living room where their daughter's giggles once filled the air. These reminders, both comforting and painful, weighed heavily on him as he worked to piece together a life that felt irreparably broken. For the community, the tragedy remained fresh in their minds. Stephanie's friends and neighbors mourned the loss of a woman whose kindness had touched so many lives. Her bakery, once a hub of joy and celebration, stood as a silent monument to her legacy. People visited, leaving flowers and notes on the steps, their words expressing sorrow, gratitude, and disbelief. The loss of her young daughter, so full of potential and innocence, made the grief even harder to bear. Morrow, though consumed by sorrow, knew he had to move forward. He began by pouring his energy into the things he and Stephanie had loved. He spent long hours at the bakery, not to escape the pain, but to honor her memory. With the help of friends and loyal employees, he kept the business running, ensuring that her passion would live on. Each cake sold, each customer served, became a small tribute to the woman who had built it all. The community, too, found ways to cope. Vigils were held by the lakeside, candles flickering in the gentle breeze as people shared stories of Stephanie and her daughter. They spoke of her generosity, her laughter, and the warmth she brought to every room she entered. It was a collective effort to preserve her memory and to heal from the shock of what had happened. But not all wounds were visible. For Morrow, the nights were the hardest. Alone with his thoughts, he replayed moments from their life together. The good times, the arguments, the things left unsaid. He questioned himself, wondering if he could have done something to prevent what had happened. It was a heavy burden, one he carried quietly as he tried to navigate a world without the two people he loved most. Jane's actions, once hidden behind a mask of friendship, were now laid bare for everyone to see. Her betrayal became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how envy could twist even the strongest of bonds. The community, while relieved that justice had been served, couldn't help but grapple with the question: how had no one seen the signs? Could they have intervened? Could they have saved Stephanie and her daughter from their fate? In the end, the tragedy served as a painful lesson. It revealed the devastating impact of unchecked emotions, of desires allowed to fester in silence. It reminded everyone of the importance of trust and the fragility of the relationships we hold dear. Jealousy turned deadly, leaving a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. As we reflect on this story, we are left to wonder, what drives someone to betray their closest friends? Could this tragedy have been avoided? Perhaps these questions will never have clear answers, but they linger as a call for self-awareness, for compassion, and for vigilance in protecting the ones we care about. This is the story of Stephanie and her daughter, a story of love, loss, and the dangerous power of envy. May their memory remind us to cherish the bonds we share and to confront the darkness within ourselves before it takes root. You've heard the story, seen the lives it touched, and felt the weight of the choices that led to this tragedy. But now, we want to hear from you. What do you think was the turning point? Was it a single moment, or a series of events that could have been stopped? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to know your perspective. If stories like this captivate you, don't miss out on more. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another gripping tale. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.